and preschool parent mentor here at Olentangy. And then Fran Gardner, if you want to wave, is also on the call. And she is the middle school and high school parent mentor here at Olentangy. So our role is just to help any parent who wants some guidance in the special education journey, and also to hear feedback from you to take to the district. And so welcome to our March session of the Parent Information Series. That's what we call our monthly virtual trainings. And so sometimes these trainings are delivered by Fran and I, and oftentimes we can find some amazing people in the district who have some great knowledge to share with us. And so that is what is happening tonight. We have Julie Sherwood and we have Sydney Blankenship. And so they are on the behavior team here at Olentangy. So they are BCBAs, which is board certified behavior analysts, and their role is to support the intervention staff here at Olentangy. So they work with intervention specialists to help understand kids' behaviors and put behavior plans in place. And another certification that Julie has is as a CPI instructor, and so that is crisis prevention intervention. And so all of our intervention staff at Olentangy, the intervention specialists and the intervention aides, they go through CPI training so that they know how to safely help a kiddo who is just getting a little out of control. And so that is what they will be talking about tonight, is some of those proactive strategies for de-escalation. And so usually their role is to be helping the staff, but tonight they are here for us. So we are free to ask any questions, and they just want this to be a really great support for the parents. So they're here to help us. And so in the chat, please ask any questions that you have throughout the night. Sometimes they will answer those during the presentation, and sometimes they will just wait until the end. So just ask those questions. And then also in the chat, we have posted the slides for the training, so don't feel like you have to write everything down. And this training will be recorded, so you also can access that link on the parent mentor section of the Olentangy website. So their training will be about 25 minutes, and then it's questions at the end. We are recording this, but we will stop the recording at the end once it's time for questions. So also, if you don't want to have your video on, there are a couple of videos that are on, and you might want to have that off if you don't want to be in the recording. And let's see if there's anything else. I think that is about it. So I will be turning it over to Sydney.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Julie and I just want to say thank you for having us here and coming and hanging out with us tonight so we can talk about proactive strategies for de-escalation. Tonight, we're going to specifically talk about positive ways that we can respond to challenging situations and how our reactions in these moments can impact behavior and the behavior of others. So we're going to start tonight's discussion with a clip that I'm sure is familiar to most of us. It's a fun clip. And so while we're watching it, pay special attention to how each character's response influences the behavior of other characters in the clip. And I think that we got to open another screen for it, but it should work.
I expected a little more from a varsity letterman.
Yeah.
You're not fooling anybody, Bender. The next screw that falls out is going to be you.
Eat my shorts.
What was that?
Eat my Shorts.
You just bought yourself another Saturday, mister.
Crushed.
You just bought one more right there.
Well, I'm free the Saturday after that. Beyond that, I'm gonna have to check my calendar.
Good, because it's gonna be filled. We'll keep going. You want another one? Say the word, just say the word. Instead of going to prison, you'll come here. Are you through?
No.
I'm doing society a favor.
So?
That's another one right now. I've got you for the rest of your natural-born life if you don't watch your step. You want another one?
Yes.
You got it. You got another one right there. That's another one, pal.
Cut it out.
You through?
Not even close, bud.
Good.
Just a little censoring.
You through?
How many is that?
That's 7, including one when we first came in. You asked Mr. Vernon here whether Barry Manilow knew that he raided his closet.
Now it's 8. You stay out of it.
Excuse me, sir, it's 7.
Shut up, Pee-wee. You're mine, Bender. For 2 months, I got you. I got you.
What can I say? I'm thrilled.
So what do you guys think? Do you think that that seemed like a situation that was being escalated or de-escalated? The principal's response to the student didn't really seem to help anything. This scene is a really good example of a power struggle back and forth. It seemed like both of them thought that if they kept going, that eventually one would win. But if you ask me, it didn't seem like anybody won there at the end, and that they're going to be spending a lot of Saturdays there at the school together. And that didn't seem like they work on things very well together, right? So, so the first thing we're going to discuss is integrated experience. And keep that clip in mind as we talk about the different de-escalation strategies and how maybe that could have been done a little differently. So a big part of today's discussion is this idea of integrated experience. So what is it? Integrated experience is the idea that we can't control other people's behavior. We can only control our response to that behavior. Our response to someone's behavior can either make a situation better or it can make it worse. And that behavior and response to behavior are dependent upon each other. So if responses can both escalate or de-escalate a situation, it's important for us to try and understand why behavior might be happening. Here we see this behavioral iceberg. And so we see that behavior could be influenced by a lot of things: thoughts, emotions, unmet needs, trauma history, physical symptoms, things like we were just talking before the training started here, hunger and sleep and needing a nap. And also, you know, diagnosis can really have a lot to do with your behavior. So if you think about iceberg, think about the Titanic, for example. The Titanic, they only saw a small piece of this iceberg, right? But really, it was everything that was below the surface that ultimately sank the ship. We need to remember that behavior is something that we observe, and that everyone has an iceberg. You have an iceberg, I have an iceberg. It's not just our students. We all deal with things that influence our behavior and our responses. So you as a parent have an iceberg. You know, remembering that, especially during heightened times and times where things feel a little rocky, that communication and behavior can mean communication, right? Especially for our kids who have maybe a more difficult time using their words in those moments. They're using their behavior.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit more about, we're going to turn over and start talking about rational detachment. And rational detachment, can everybody hear me? Okay. I can only see Sydney in the corner. So, so rational detachment is really our ability to stay objective and calm and kind of regulated ourselves in the midst of these incidences that might be a little bit heightened or a little bit stressful. And so one of the things that we think about when we talk about rational detachment is our ability to really observe the behavior just as behavior, right? And like Sydney was saying, you know, that iceberg, we're only seeing the tip of it, of what's going on. That's what's visible, right? That behavior is the piece that's visible, but there's all these things that are under the surface that we can't see that are contributing to the situation. And behavior is communication. So when we're observing behaviors of others, when we're looking at our kids that, might be having a rough time, one of the things is that we want to look at, because it's going to help us stay objective, is what is that person trying to communicate to me with their behavior? What is my child trying to tell me without telling me? And then we're going to ask ourselves, okay, so then how am I responding to that? And then what am I expressing or conveying to them? And then how are they responding back to me? This is kind of that integrated experience. So when you're observing a behavior, whether it's a challenging behavior, a problem behavior, if our kids are refusing to do something, if you think about it in terms of what are they trying to tell me, how am I responding, how are they reacting to how I'm responding, that's going to help you stay kind of rational and kind of compartmentalize what's happening instead of taking it personally. And so one thing that we know is, for anybody's brain, when our brains are under stress, the pieces of our brains that help us regulate our emotions and have more control over our responses, those actually start shutting down. So your brain stops firing to the places that help you with problem solving and emotional regulation and higher level thinking. And when you're stressed or you're kind of in those moments where you're agitated or escalated, everybody's brain starts firing more in the pieces in the middle part of their brain where you have these, where your emotions and things, it's more that fight or flight response. And so the thing to know is that this is what happens to our kids' brains when they're under stress or they're dysregulated, but it also happens to our brains when we're under stress or when we're dysregulated. And so if you have two stressed out brains, you're going to have weaker control over thoughts, emotions, and actions. And so this is where having us maintain that rational detachment, trying to stay, kind of objective about the situation, is going to help us keep our brain in check so that we can be responding more effectively to someone who is having more of that stressed out brain, right? And so when we're in these situations, communication is really important. And communication has 3 different components to it. So there's verbal communication, which is the actual words that we're saying. There's nonverbal communication, which is like our body language, our facial expressions. And then there's something called paraverbal communication. And this kind of incorporates our tone of voice, the volume of our voice, and also the rate and rhythm of our speech. And one thing to know, and this is a study that was done out of Cornell University, that human beings really only take meaning from a message. The meaning is, the words that we say only accounts for 7% of what we understand that meaning to be. That 93% of the messages that we receive from others, we get that message from the facial expressions, the tone of voice, the body language, and all those things. And this is actually why like emojis were created, because text messaging, you only get words, right? You don't get all that other context. And so there was a lot of misunderstanding when people would send a text. It's like, well, what did you mean by that? Because there wasn't those other pieces that we know are part of communication. And so in thinking about that when we're in these situations with our kids, that the words that we're saying don't matter even a fraction as much as our tone of voice, volume of our voice, our facial expression, all those things. And so being really mindful of the nonverbals and the paraverbals within these situations is going to be really key to helping de-escalate a situation. And so really when we're talking about rational detachment, this is when you're asking yourself in these moments, okay, so how am I feeling right now? It's really hard sometimes because, man, some of our kids can come up with some creative, like going for the jugular doozies that really like hits you really hard, but it's really important not to take what they're saying or doing personally. I know for me, it's really hard for me to not instantly start judging myself, like, oh, how did I let it get to this point? That kind of stuff. At this moment, it's not personal. If we react to some of the things that our kids are saying or some of their mannerisms or some of their actions, they're going to realize that they have found a button and they're going to push that button all the time, right? And so trying to stay rational, calm, detached, from taking it personally. Q-tip stands for quit taking it personally. When I was teaching, I used to literally tape a Q-tip to the board so that my staff and I would have that reminder, like, it's not personal, it's not personal. But another piece of this is that when we are staying calm, regardless of what's happening, regardless of other people's behavior, we can control our response. what we end up being is a model of what self-regulation looks like, and that can help our kids co-regulate, right? So we become a mirror for them. This is what we want to see them doing. So if they're really agitated, they're really upset, or they're really emotional, and we are staying really even keeled, that brings down the energy of the room, that brings them down. We're modeling, we know that kids imitate, models. We know that as human beings, we mirror each other. And there have been things where, like, if you see somebody kind of rocking, without being conscious of it, other people might start rocking too. And so we know that this is something that happens. And so this co-regulation is a big piece of this, that if we can stay calm, our kids might inadvertently start modeling what we're doing. Okay, so sounds all great, right? But in the moment, before and after, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. And so, we always hear about self-care being so critical, and it sounds really good, and it sounds like this mantra. But the reason that it's critical is because that's going to help us keep our brain regulated. And our brains are firing, and we're not even aware of it, right? And so if we are in a more regulated state, if we have this constantly stressed out brain, we're starting off in a bad place to be able to be rational and to be proactive and positive in these situations. If we are taking care of ourselves, it doesn't have to be this spa weekend all the time. It's little things, getting lots of good sleep. We were talking about napping, eating healthy foods, getting exercise, having a hobby, or having fun, and just, parenting is hard. Getting those little moments to yourself. I know for me, sometimes it's like, if I get one hot shower from start to finish without anybody saying mom, like, that is a win for me, and I feel like a new person after that uninterrupted shower. It's little things like that. And so before we get into these situations, all of those things are important. When we are in the middle of a situation where we have our kids or our spouse or our significant other, anybody really, is escalated, during those times, that's when you want to take deep breaths. You want to kind of focus on, again, just staying separate, stepping back and observing the behavior as it's happening, checking your ego at the door, because again, it's not about you. We're trying to calm that person down by maintaining ourselves. Using other people for support. Sometimes, you might need to tag out, and that's okay. You might say, you're kind of butting heads, you're at a stalemate, you're like, man, I'm trying everything I can think of in my bag of tricks, trade places with me, and you tag out with your partner. Another thing to do is to think about what I call taking it down a notch. So get quieter, slow yourself down, maybe sit down and get lower to the ground, so that you're basically communicating like, everything, we're just going to take it all down a notch. We're going to take a minute. And then after these situations, if they're stressful, right? So you might need to step out of the room to regroup. You might need to go scream into a pillow. You might call a friend on the phone and be like, I can't believe what just happened, because you've been keeping it so together throughout the whole situation with your kid, and you stayed strong and you did great. And now you're like, I need to get this out, and that's okay. Anything, pour yourself a glass of wine, give a little cheers to yourself, anything that you can do to help yourself decompress and de-escalate yourself, because in trying to de-escalate another person, a lot of times we are having to fight our own fight or flight response, right? And so it's hard. And so giving yourself that permission to go, okay, go and take some breaths, go lay down for a minute, whatever you need to do, be able to process the situation. It's going to be important, because this is all going to be a key in being able to continually address these situations, because it's not a one and done, right? We're going to have these things with our kids, to be able to be more positive and proactive about this if we are in a healthier space. Okay, so that being said, talking about being proactive, how can we prevent problem behavior? So we know from research that we can improve behavior by 80% just by giving positive reinforcement to the behavior that we want to see more of, right? And so, this is something we're really, really good at calling kids out when we see them doing something wrong, because we have these expectations. It's like, well, hey, brothers and sisters they just do it the first time, or this is just what a kid's supposed to do. They're supposed to listen to their parents. They're supposed to X, Y, or Z, supposed to. And so when they don't do that, we give a lot of attention to it. We say, you need to stop, or whatever it is. We're not always great just as human beings at acknowledging the good things that people are doing, and saying, wow, that's really great. Thanks so much for doing X, Y, or Z. But we do know just in behavior that reinforcement increases the likelihood of that behavior continuing in the future. And so we want to catch them being good. Another thing is that if we know our kids, right? Like, you guys know your kids inside and out, and so you can see those little changes. You know that if they start to, get louder, sometimes our kids get more withdrawn. If you see that their body language starts to change, if they have certain mannerisms that it's like, oh man, they're starting on that downward slope. We're kind of going into that tornado mode. That's when you want to jump in and do something, right, to intervene before it gets to be this big emotional situation or big problem or big, power struggle. And so little things that we can do on the front end of behavior are things like planned ignoring. So this sometimes looks like, if you have other children in your home, you might be like, oh, wow, so-and-so, I love how you're cleaning up, the toys. And then when your child that you want to see cleaning up the toys starts to join in, you're like, oh, well, great. Thanks so much, Johnny. I really appreciate that you're cleaning up too. So you're just completely ignoring them. You're reinforcing somebody else who's exhibiting that behavior. It might also just look like, hey, I can't wait to see you start cleaning up your room. Okay, I'll talk to you in a second. And then you ignore them for a minute because you're just telling them what they need to do to get your attention, and you're not going to attend to anything else that they're doing. This one's hard, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you can't ignore what's happening, right? So you have to think about this as just one of the strategies in your bag of tricks. Hurdle help is something where it's like getting them over the hump. So say they're getting really super frustrated, like with their homework. This would be like sitting down with them, helping them through the first 3 problems and letting them go the rest on their own. Or if they're really overwhelmed with, cleaning up their room, like this says, maybe you help them pick up all the dirty laundry on the floor, and then they're in charge of doing the rest of the room. So you're basically working together to get them going, to get them kind of over that little roadblock, and then they keep going. Just little signs of affection, just a caring gesture. If you see that your child is starting to get really frustrated or really emotional, sometimes just giving them a pat on the back, sometimes giving them a hug, just saying, hey, I know you can do it. Little things. It's not a demand. It's not an ultimatum. It's just a little kind of dose of care, I guess, so that the kids feel supported, right? And then also giving them a chance to take a break. So again, this is all on the front end as you see them start to escalate. This is not in response necessarily to some of the behaviors that we're seeing. We're going to talk about that in a second. So this is kind of to try to ward off bigger behavioral situations. Taking a break is just what it says. If they're starting to get really frustrated, you just say, okay, you know what? Set that down for a second. Let's go do something else. Not necessarily like a super favorite thing. If they don't want, say you're saying, okay, I don't know, I need you to unload the dishwasher. And they're really not interested. They're really struggling to want to get up and do the dishwasher. It's like, okay, you know what? Why don't you wipe off the table real quick, and then you can unload the dishwasher in a couple seconds. It's not, okay, go ahead and watch TV and go play some video games and then come back. It's just shifting the focus to another task and putting this on the back burner for a second and coming back to it. Okay, so this is the whole thing that we're trying to avoid. This is the conflict cycle. And so when we think about a power struggle with our students, this stressful incident, right? This is the under the surface of the iceberg. These are the things that we may not be able to see, right? Sometimes we know what triggers our kids, and a lot of times we don't. So these stressful moments cause our students or our kids to have some feelings. Those feelings then trigger certain behaviors. And then this right here, like Sydney was saying, this is where we have power, right? This is the only spot that we have any control. And so our response can either lessen the stress, which then reduces the feelings and therefore reduces the behavior, or our response can increase the stress, which increases the feelings, which increases the intensity of the behavior. And so if we end up causing more stress with bigger feelings and more intense behavior, and then that's going to trigger stress from us that causes more stress for the kids, it starts to cycle, and then we end up at this point of crisis, right? And so our goal is that this very first cycle, this very first event, when we get to this other's reaction, which is us, that we are intervening or we're reacting appropriately so that it doesn't continue to spin. Okay, so how do we break the cycle? So one of the things that we're going to do is the very first thing is using positive self-talk. And that sounds kind of, might sound kind of silly, but the first thing you're going to want to do is in yourself, make sure that you are in a good place. You're going to check in with yourself and go, okay, I got this. I can do this. I'm going to stay detached. I'm going to stay rationally detached, you know, anything like that. And again, this is where like, it's really easy to judge, to start getting really down on yourself or negative about yourself. Like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. Like, how did I let it get this far? Or what did I not do? You know, whatever it is. So we want to really kind of build ourselves up and, you know, give ourselves a little mini pep talk in our own head. And then we're going to listen and validate their feelings, because what we see is that if kids are starting to engage in challenging behavior, whether it's that they are talking back, whether it's they're shutting down, if our kids are, you know, regardless of their communication needs, we know that they're struggling, right? We know that they're having a moment where something is hard. And so we want to address them. Say, wow, I can see that this is really hard for you. Or, well, it looks like you're really feeling sad right now. So you're going to address the child, validate their feelings. You're not going to be like, you know, this is not a time when you're going to start telling them what they're doing wrong, right? So you're going to ignore the behavior for a minute, address the feelings. Then we're going to manage the environment. If just validating their feelings doesn't bring the situation down, managing the environment. So just like in that video, when Molly Ringwald says, knock it off, and then you can see him posturing, you know, he's like, not even close, you know, that kind of thing. Sometimes having others present, whether it's siblings or friends or anybody, you know, family members in the room, it can actually increase the stress of the situation. And so we want to try to remove the audience if possible, so that's just you and your child. Some of our kids at this moment might need some sensory support. So if there's something that really helps them calm down, this would be the time to offer that. If they use a communication device, this would be the time to prompt them to tell you what they need. So then if we're still kind of in that spinning, right? We're still in that cycle. This is when you would give your child some choices and give them time to decide what to do next. And that's something that we don't do a good job of either, is giving kids time to process. And so this might be something where you say, okay, if you do this, then you do this. And so this is something where you're going to want to give the student or give your child the positive behavior that you want to see first. So it's like, hey, if you eat your peas, then you get ice cream. But if you don't eat your dinner, then there's no dessert, you know? So you're going to want to state the positive thing first. It would be like if you parked in a no parking zone and a police officer came up to you and said, you know, you parked in the wrong spot, I'm giving you a ticket, versus saying, hey, this is a no parking zone. If you move your car right now, I won't have to give you a ticket. But if you choose not to move your car, you're going to have to pay a pretty hefty fee, you know? And so if you think about the tone of those two different scenarios, giving the kids the option to make a positive choice is going to be important, and telling them what they need to do to get a good outcome. Setting limits, sometimes a choice is not an option. Sometimes they have to do it. And so sometimes this might be something like, it's a non-negotiable, right? Like, this has to happen. You have to eat some food. Like, you can't go without eating. It's for their health or safety. Something is going on, you know, so you might say, look, you have to eat 2 bites of this, or you have to drink your protein drink, or you have to take your medicine, you know, whatever it is. So you have to take your medicine. As soon as you do, you get to do this really cool thing, whether it's, you know, you get to play on the iPad, or you get to watch Moana, or whatever it is. So the sooner you do this, the sooner you get that cool thing. And so then you just leave the ball in their court. And if they want to waste, you know, if it's something that is not time sensitive, obviously. But then this gives the kid a little bit of control to say, okay, look, like, I get it. You know, let's just get this over with, right? And then they want to go on and get the next cool thing. A fail-safe choice is also called a controlled choice. So you might say, okay, it's time to clean your room. And that's the non-negotiable. You have to clean your room. But do you want to start with picking up your clothes or picking up your toys? You know, you have to do your homework. Do you want to start with reading or math? You got to eat all the vegetables on your plate. Do you want to eat the broccoli first or the peas first? You know, so basically you end up winning, but the kids feel like they have some control in the situation, right? So it's called a fail-safe choice, because no matter what they choose, you win, right? Parents win. It's just the kid has a little bit of wiggle room. Redirecting them to another. So this is, again, if that cycle still, if you try these things, the cycle's still going, it's like, okay, we've tried this first then thing. So maybe we say, okay, first do this, then you get that. Maybe it's, all right, first we're going to say it's unload the dishwasher, like I was saying. First, okay, let's shift gears for a second, like in the other thing where I was talking about, trying another positive activity on the front end. You can also do that on a reactive side. And this is also where we can get some behavioral momentum. So it's like, okay, let's do the plates, then the dishes, then the glasses, then the woo, yeah, okay, now it's done, look at that, or sometimes we might say, all right, let's start with some stretching exercises before we, clean our room, let's touch our head, let's do some jumping jacks, let's grab the laundry, let's grab the toys, so then it becomes almost like a game, but you get the momentum going, you get their mind off of it for a second, you get them engaged, you rope them in, and then you get them going on that task that you actually want them to do. Appealing to their self-interest. Again, this might be something where, you're offering them things that that they love, but it also might be something like for some of our older kids, hey, I know that at some point you really, really want to have your own apartment. Or, hey, I know you really want to get your driver's license. Part of your getting your driver's license is being really responsible. And so you can show me how responsible you can be by doing X, Y, and Z. Or, I know you really want to get your own apartment someday. Part of having an apartment is taking care of it. So right now, I need to see that you can take care of things by doing X, Y, or Z. So appealing to the things that, are important to them. And then sometimes there are moments where you hit a point where it's like, okay, how do I really want this to end? Do we want to end with, just like in that scenario with the principal, do we want to just assert our authority? Do we want them to see us as an authority figure? Or do we want to maintain the relationship and actually teach our kids to maybe advocate for themselves, or to have some regulation strategies, to know when they need to take a break, to be able to communicate with us? And so dropping or changing the expectation doesn't necessarily mean that you're never going to come back to it. It just means that at this moment you realize that nobody is regulated or in a space where this is going to be productive. And so you say, okay, so maybe it's homework, and you're just fighting tooth and nail. They are absolutely refusing. And you say, okay, tell you what, you do 2 problems right now and you're done, or you'd say, I get it. One more bite and whatever. One more bite and then you're done with your dinner. If you get to the point where you're just at a stalemate, you might have to drop or change the expectation. One of the things about setting limits with kids is that we need them to be enforceable and reasonable. And so if the expectation was like, you have to eat all of your dinner, well, they may not actually be that hungry. So it might be impossible for them to get that food in their body. And so it's not going to be reasonable to have that expectation, right? Or if you say, okay, if you do this, then if you don't do this, then I'm taking away your screen time for the entire week. Well, then it comes a time where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to give them their iPad, and forget it. Just take your iPad, whatever. Well, then we've completely cut our own legs out from underneath us, right? Because we've lost credibility. And so making sure that whatever you say, the expectation is that you are able to follow through on it. If you have to drop the expectation as far as like what you want them to do, if you have to change it a little bit in that moment, then I would just come back to it, right? So you say, okay, look, right now, let's just take a minute. We're not going to worry about this right now. Get everybody calmed down, and then come back to it and use some of those proactive strategies when you come back to it, if that makes sense. And then after the situation, I know we're running close to our time. After the situation, we want to make sure that we give our kids an opportunity to reconnect with us, right? Because this is hard and this can be damaging. These kind of situations can be damaging to our relationships with our kids. And so we want to talk to them one-on-one. We want to just have them discuss the facts. But then this is an opportunity for us to connect feelings to behavior and behavior to choices. And so we say, look, it sounds like when you get sad, this is what happened. This is what I see. So next time you feel sad, what could we do instead? And so when you're connecting these feelings, you're giving your kid the opportunity to do some self-checking and some kind of like looking into themselves and assessing what they need. And then you're going to create a plan together. Now, some of our kids can't do this. They can't process the situation, whether it's because of their age or their disabilities. And so this is something that you can also do with another person in your household, that you can be talking through the scenario that just happened and be like, okay, what can we do next time? What should we try? You know, that kind of stuff. So just know, I know that this is really heavy stuff and it's really stressful situations. And we've kind of flown through some pretty big topics, but just know that nobody is perfect at this. We're all human. You know, have patience with yourselves, have patience with your kids. Extend yourself a little bit of grace, because we're not going to, even if you had all these strategies memorized and in your bag of tricks, you're not going to do them right 100% of the time. These situations with our kids are always dynamic. They're always changing. And the kids keep us on our toes, and it really does take a village to raise a child. And so I think that just keeping in mind that it's not going to be perfect, but effort matters. So, okay.
There was a question about maybe finding a time to talk about not taking it personally when it's your own kid, which I know Julie and I talked about that, like how to be detached, but knowing that whenever it's at home, it can be a little bit more personal than maybe like for us in the classroom. So I'm gonna talk about these next couple of slides, and then we can definitely discuss more about not taking it so personally at home. So we just talked about all these different strategies, and of course they're great, useful to keep in mind and practice when you're communicating with others, your students, your kids, your partners, co-workers. They're all great strategies. But sometimes you might see that behavior with your child or even with yourself is becoming unmanageable, and that happens. And that if that happens and you feel that way, it is okay to ask for help and to seek support. You can do that with parent groups from an educational team is a great way to start. You know, we all have a lot of resources available to us. So help from your educational team. There are support services and home services that are specifically for students' behavior at home, and seeking help from other professionals. That's especially, of course, there are professionals for our kids, but even for yourself, knowing that there are professionals that can help you. And like Julie said, reaching out to a friend, or sometimes, so I don't have kids, but I know that sometimes when it's work or when it's friend disagreements and things like that, I always go to my husband, and he might not always want to hear that all the time. And so seeking a person that's outside of your life that you can discuss those things with could be really important and really helpful if you're finding that it's something that you need to process more often. And then for those students who might have more needs, and you want to look into those home services, communicating with your Delaware County or Franklin County Board of VD case manager, the intake department, from what I've heard, is kind of the first place to start. And then the next slide is just talking about some websites with additional resources. That's the Franklin County website, and that's the Delaware County website. The last two are links for, well, Nationwide, of course, has home services, and they have behavioral health specialists and more of a medical side of things and a health side of things. The link above it, the Ohio Coalition for Education, it has some resources. It's really just like a web page. It has a bunch of websites and books and groups that you can click on, and it's got a lot of parent groups. And I think Julie mentioned that she's seen that Nationwide also lists some more like parent-friendly groups, social groups, and things like that. So I think the last slide is just about questions or comments. Julie and I just want to thank everyone for having us here tonight and for letting us present and for sharing your evening with us. So if you have any questions, we're going to hang around for a little bit and answer those, or if you want to talk more, we'll be here. But other than that, that's it for tonight. So thank you guys for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So Julie, that question was just about which I think it's funny because I know you and I kind of talked a little bit about that when we were discussing the training, talking about not taking things as personally when it's your own kid, and maybe it's specific to, like you said, specific to yourself. I've gotten called even from kids at school. You know, you get, like you said, called some specific names or very personal to the way you look or the way you dress or the way you speak. And so, how do we kind of take our emotions out of that?
Yeah, and I think that part of it is being in a place where we have some mental toughness, right? We are mentally strong and healthy, and we're taking care of ourselves. That's going to be a piece of it. But also, you know, sometimes I swear that parents could earn an Emmy sometimes for, you know, and teachers, because we have to take stuff and be stone-faced and try really hard to separate ourselves for a minute, and then after the fact, you know, go and tell somebody, be like, man, I am really struggling with letting go of this. You know, I'm a person that things spin in my head, you know, and I'll lose sleep over comments that are made or things where I'm like, oh, I can't believe I said that, you know. And so those things are hard for me to let go of. And so learning how to, you know, if you write it down in a journal and you rip it out of your journal and light the paper on fire or something, you know what I mean? Like whatever it is that you have to get that thought out. But knowing that, I think that for me, it's helpful to know how the brain processes stress and how your brain goes from anything that's a higher level thought, right? And it's the cortex of your brain. So the top layer basically of your brain. That's where your more of your emotional control, your problem solving, higher level thinking, all of that stuff. And actually in our kids, that part of your brain is not totally developed until you're between 25 and 28 years old. So some of our kids their cortex is underdeveloped anyway, so they're not going to be able to emotionally regulate even as well as we are, just because of their age. Then you throw in that they're under stress and they're going fight or flight, then, you know, for me, it's kind of like, it brings it down to more a scientific level than a personal level, because then you can be like, okay, look, some of these things are being said because they're out of control. They're not in their right mind. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, they're saying these things, but especially the ones who know us best also have the tools to hurt us most, right? They know how to go for the jugular, like I said. And so, I think that that's another reason why processing together afterwards is really important, to try to rebuild that relationship. And it's okay if you don't get over it instantaneously. I mean, it can take a minute, especially if your feelings get really hurt. I mean, that's normal and we're human.
That's like a good thing to remember, Julie. You just said, like, doing the meeting afterwards. You know, we think and we focus on, okay, so we meet afterwards for the student. I think for me personally, I think, you know, after a crisis, you meet afterwards for the student. But just as much as for the student, it's nice to hear the student that called you maybe not a nice name to say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry I called you that, I was upset, or
right.
You know, to show that they actually love you and that it was just a moment. Like, adults need that too. You know, we have those connections with our students when they say those things. It is hurtful, and so sometimes you have to say, it's a kid and I'm an adult and it's going to be okay. But it is nice, not just for the student but for ourselves, to talk it through afterwards and make a plan, like you said. I think some of the questions were just about, like, parent groups and Facebook groups. That would be something, I think, in the future for future trainings. I know I always have put that kind of at the end, like, find a parent group, but because I'm not a parent, I'm not super aware of those groups. But we can always make sure that, like, Julie Shrudavy and I kind of look into that. We might be able to find some more parent groups to provide in future trainings to give more specific groups, for sure.
Yeah, and also I was saying in there too that Fran and I are hosting monthly virtual coffee chats, and so parents are always welcome to join those as well. So are you as far as, like, hearing what you're saying about the like Q-tip and not taking it personally, is it kind of, so if it's a kiddo that you have a close relationship with, you know, like a student, or especially if it's your child, then it's like you're just not taking it personally in that moment of escalation, and you're detaching then, and then you're trying to sort of talk it through later when things aren't escalated.
Yeah, and it's not wrong after, especially for some of our kids, like if you're processing it afterwards, be like, look, it seems like every time you get angry, you say some really hurtful things, because that's a behavior that's going to really impact their relationships, not just in their family, but for their life. And so if you can connect the fact that, hey, when you get mad, you kind of, your mouth kind of runs wild and you say some things that are really hurtful. So next time you feel angry, what could you do instead of saying hurtful things to still get your point across and still get your needs met in a different way that's going to be more productive? Because then what we're doing is we're building skills within our kids rather than just like trying to sweep it under the rug like we do a lot of the time. It's like, okay, that's over and moving on. If we can take it to say, look, when you're angry, this is what you said. Do you want to talk about that, or do you have anything to say about that? Because, and this is after everybody's calm and you are calm. You're not mad about it anymore. You're not going to be like, why did you say that? It's just really like a rational conversation, but you let them know that it's not okay to say those things, and that's not gonna lead to it's going to lead to a lonely life if they're going to keep being full when they get mad.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You guys make lots of sense. I love all of your advice. It's great.
It's always good to make sense. That's great.
And did you also notice that if you're 80, I loved the 80% of the time, or you can change 80% of behavior by increasing your, what is it? Like your positive praise of what you like.
Yeah.
So I thought that was that was kind of mind blowing. And then I also asked if that was a guarantee and if I could drop my kids off at your house if that does not work.
Yeah. I mean, sure, drop them off. My boys would love to have some company. No, but there's a lot of research around a ratio of 4-to-1. And so there's a lot that says that 4 positives to every negative statement. So if you're saying that we should be catching kids doing the right thing and acknowledging that 4 times more than we're giving them corrective feedback. And so, there's a whole lot around just positive reinforcement. It's one of the strongest behavioral strategies that we have. It is the strongest behavioral strategy that we have, to change behavior. So
that's awesome.
Julie, I read a article recently talking about like that similar, but keeping, like when a student's doing something I always say student because I don't have kids. When a kid's doing something that you don't like, to not like, sandwiching used to be a big thing. Oh, hey, I really like the way that you're doing those dishes, but could you do it a little quieter? I read like a study saying that making sure that you keep those things separate. So like the 4-to-1, like if you're really going to give us your kid some sort of feedback about their behavior, not trying to like soften the blow with a nice thing first or after. You're really like giving them that feedback, and then those 4 other times are really just that positive. So like keeping them kind of separate when you give that feedback, I've read, can also make a difference, because it doesn't kind of muddy the waters for kids of, well, they kind of like that, or like, I don't know, was that good feedback or bad feedback? Did I follow the rules? Did I not? I don't know. So keeping those things kind of differentiated, I think is a good idea too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, I think, are there any other questions? Does anyone else, you're welcome to unmute and ask a question, or if there's anything in the chat. Otherwise, we will call it a night.
Sounds good.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And thank you for this suggestion in the chat box here. Okay. Well, thank you, Julie and Sydney, so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Good night, everybody.
Everybody have a good night.
Bye. Thanks.
See ya.